Scary things experienced by night shift workers. Anonymous said that he used to work as a graveyard custodian in a building by himself. Now, when he started, he was told that the building was very weird and that he should stay on his toes. He called bull, but after working there a year, he was pretty convinced that something weird was going on. He was riding the elevator to a different floor, but instead of going to that floor, it went straight to the basement. The doors open, and all of the sudden, a dark figure starts walking towards the elevator, and he freaks out. He hit the doors to close, and the figure just kept getting closer. He ended up standing outside of the building for a half an hour or so while the police searched the basement. What really freaked him out was that the one entrance into the basement was locked and barred, and they didn't find anyone down there after searching everywhere.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew, Part 18. A man from Queens once spent 5 months in jail completely unaware that his bail was just $2. Since spiders molt, when you see what you might think is a dead spider, it could just be that the spider left behind its exoskeleton and is now bigger than before. Dr. Seuss cheated on his wife while she had cancer, and then she proceeded to commit suicide. Almost everyone on Earth is walking around with a bunch of poop inside of them. Scientists accidentally killed the world's oldest living animal, which was a clam that lived to be 507 years old. Statistically speaking, at least one person who comments on this video will not be alive tomorrow. The real reason you shouldn't eat raw cookie dough isn't because of getting sick from eating raw eggs. It's because you shouldn't eat raw flour, which contains fecal matter from all the birds flying over the field and pooping on the wheat. Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew, Part 19. Facebook was forced to shut down 2 artificial intelligence robots named Alice and Bob because they started communicating with one another in their own language. If you ever win the lottery, you're 120 times more likely to be killed by an immediate family member. A sloth has nipples in its armpits. In the 17th century, there was a man named Tare who could eat his entire body weight in just one sitting. And despite being pretty skinny, he would swallow live animals, eat human corpses, and was even accused of eating the body of a 3-year-old toddler. An 11-year-old boy named Konarak escaped Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment but was later returned to Dahmer by police, and he killed the boy just 30 minutes after. It's commonly believed in religion that angels look like this, but according to the Bible, they actually look like this.
After the massacre at Higgins Haven, the body of serial killer Jason Voorhees was taken to the Wessex County morgue. Despite being hit in the head with an axe, Jason woke up and killed both the coroner and a nurse. He left the morgue and headed back to Crystal Lake. Conveniently, a fresh group of teenagers were making their way to Camp Crystal Lake on a weekend getaway. They spotted a hitchhiker on their way but didn't have any room in the car. Soon after they drove past, the hitchhiker was stabbed in the neck and killed by Jason. Upon their arrival at Crystal Lake, the teens had a party, as you do, which naturally didn't go down well with Jason. He then proceeded to kill Samantha, Paul, Terry, Mrs. Jarvis, Jimmy, Tina, Ted, Doug, Sarah and Rob. There's Rob there, bottom right. A showdown between Tommy, Jason and Trish led to Tommy shaving his head, in the hope that Jason would think it was himself as a child and confuse him. It did. Trish hit Jason and his mask fell off. Tommy then drove a machete through his skull. Surely that was the end of Jason. This is Patrick David McKay, better known as the Devil's Disciple and the Psychopath. A victim of childhood abuse, McKay was frequently beaten by his father, an alcoholic suffering from PTSD after the Vietnam War. When his father died of a heart attack, McKay couldn't handle it. He went into an extreme state of denial. He was sent to various borstalls and prisons during his teenage years, and was removed from the family home 18 times. McKay on each occasion had beaten up his mum and 2 sisters. He went on to torture animals before attempting to kill his mum and auntie. McKay even decorated his flat with Nazi memorabilia. He went on to kill his friend, Father Crean. When arrested, McKay claimed to have killed 11 people in total. Only 3 were confirmed. He's been in prison since November 1975. That's 45 years. My latest podcast episode covers this case and comes out tomorrow if you'd like to hear more about it. The link for the streaming services is in my bio.
I think some people don't realize that the Titanic is almost gone. Like, it has about 30 years before it fully disintegrates. And yes, a lot of this has to do with rusticles and the bacteria that's eating it, but there's also been some human intervention that has not been great for the ship. Sure, there's some that are sightseeing like Ocean Gate, but there is a huge industry for goods that are taken from the Titanic. There have been thousands of items that have been retrieved from the Titanic, and a lot of them go for serious money. This kimono that was rumored to be worn by Lady Duff Gordon as she was escaping the sinking ship went for $75,000. This letter was actually retrieved from a body that was found in the wreckage. And in it he says, "If all goes well, I'll arrive in New York Wednesday morning." This wasn't recovered from the Titanic, but a menu was up for sale. And the most expensive thing to ever be sold was this violin from the group of musicians who were playing as the ship went down. In 2020, a company actually got the rights to cut into the ship in order to retrieve a radio, further damaging the boat. So the conversation for a long time has been, is it worth it to damage the boat in order to retrieve things? But now the conversation is just, is it worth it to go down there at all?
This man killed his neighbor using Pokemon cards. 31-year-old Andrew Haig. And on August 2nd, 2022, he got into a heated argument with his neighbor. This man, 50-year-old Simon Wilkinson. So according to Andrew, on that day, Simon called him a racial slur and used some curse words, and that sent him into a rage. So Andrew then yelled at Simon to come fight me like a man, and when he stepped outside, Andrew began repeatedly attacking him with a bag that contained 5 tins of Pokemon cards. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what these are metal tins that come with booster packs and promo cards inside, but they're really hard and rigid, made out of metal. And I can't imagine someone wailing on you at full strength with a bag full of these. So after hitting him with these Pokemon cards, Simon was on the ground asking for help, and that's when Andrew killed him. Andrew repeatedly punched and stomped on Simon's body, and then retrieved a plank of wood and beat him to a pulp, which effectively killed him. So Andrew, as it turns out, had been diagnosed in the past with schizophrenia and had stopped taking his medication only a short time before this assault happened. And just this year, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 17 years.
So this next story comes in from one of our YouTube followers, Black Vortex Storm Chasers. My uncle told me a story about an incident that happened to him when he was around 17 years old. He lived in a small town in the Texas Panhandle, and he had a bedroom in the back of the house. On this particular night, he had gone to bed, but was having trouble getting to sleep. He was laying in bed, tossing and turning. Eventually he fell asleep, but he kept waking up because he was feeling like there was someone in his room. He got up a few times and turned on the light, but didn't see anyone. He said he finally shrugged it off and he blamed it on the Texas heat. He finally got comfortable again to doze off when he suddenly was woken up to someone violently pulling at his feet. He said that they were trying to pull him off the bed. He tried to scream, but he couldn't open his mouth because nothing would come out. He held onto his headboard, trying not to be pulled off his bed. He said all he could do was hold on. He then started to pray with all his might, and as soon as he did, it just stopped. It stopped as fast as it started. He jumped out of bed, turned on the light, and as he ran out the room to his mom's room, he told her what happened. That's when they noticed deep bruising around his ankles. His mom told him to pray because it could have been a demon sent by the devil himself to collect him. Needless to say, he never slept in that room again.
Disneyland doesn't want you to know about the Disney Dark Ages. This is a period of time at the Disney parks known for having the worst ride malfunctions and bloodiest accidents in the park's history. It cost the park millions, it was absolutely the park's fault for it happening, and it's what tonight's episode is going to be all about. Basically, during this era, Disney said, hey, we're not going to pay to maintain the rides anymore, we're just going to fix them as accidents arise. They felt like it was costing them too much money to continually maintain the rides for safety, so they cut all of the maintenance. They even cut having people on site to make sure that people's seatbelts are fastened properly. Instead, they just had a few maintenance teams that operated at night that would fix the rides that had issues during that day. And this was a horrible idea. For instance, the teacups weren't maintained at all until an 11-year-old boy was flung from them and broke his vertebrae. And no one bothered to check Space Mountain to make sure it was functioning properly until a wheel fell off the coaster and 9 people got hurt. And as these accidents are arising, there's actually a rule in the park that attendants can't call 911. So there were all of these horrible accidents happening all the time, and no one was able to call the paramedics. Instead, they had to call Disney Services, who would in turn call the Anaheim Fire Department. There's obviously a lot more to this story, and I'm going to tell more of them here eventually, but tonight's episode is going to be a deep dive into all of this.
The woman you just saw in that video, 21-year-old TikTok star Carla Pardini, was found dead last year. She had been gunned down outside of her home after receiving an eerie phone call. So before she was murdered, Carla was growing an audience here on TikTok, and she lived in the city of Culiacan in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico. So according to Carla's own mother, on the night of September 20th, 2022, Carla was inside of her home when she received a mysterious phone call from a stranger telling her to step outside. Carla then stepped outside of her home, and that's when the shooting occurred. The next day, Carla's body was discovered at an intersection in her neighborhood, and she had been shot multiple times, which led to her death. So witnesses who saw this happen actually claim that there were multiple armed men in the area when she was murdered, which means that Carla was ambushed by some sort of group. Prosecutors and investigators in Mexico also stated that they were working on this case in secrecy as to not alert the perpetrators. But unfortunately, till this day, no arrest has been made in this case, and Carla's murder has gone unsolved. Some people have claimed that her murder has something to do with that chilling final video that she posted on TikTok. But who killed her remains a mystery.
Part 3 of the Lola James case. Kyle Bevan and Sinead James were sentenced yesterday on the 25th of April 2023. During their trial, Lola's grandmother addressed Kyle and said, "Look at me, Kyle. You haven't just taken away Lola from our family, you've also taken away the happy childhood that her sisters should have had." She recalled how her cheeky monkey granddaughter loved nothing more than the outdoors and was happiest when she was caked in mud, playing in her shorts and wellies. She said that she blames herself and feels a lot of guilt for not spotting the signs, and she sits outside the house every night talking to Lola and telling her about her day. Mr. Justice Griffiths said that the attack on Lola was a culmination of months of physical child abuse towards Lola. He said, "I am sure Kyle Bevan did this as an exercise of power, an assertion of superiority over the only person he could feel superior to, a helpless child. He has no remorse at all. At the time, he didn't even simulate sadness about Lola's injuries or condition. He was only concerned about himself." On April 25th, 2023, Kyle Bevan was sentenced to life with a minimum of 28 years for the murder of Lola James. Lola's mother, Sinead James, was sentenced to 6 years for allowing the death of her daughter. She'll serve just 3 years of that before being released on licence. She's also lost custody of her other 2 daughters.
This man murdered his wife when she refused to go on a reality TV show. David Trons and Shanti Cooper Trons met on a dating site in 2013. When they met, he told her that he had inherited between $4 and $6 million from his dad. The pair, who lived in Orlando, ended up getting married just 1 year before her tragic death. In April 2018, David claimed that he found his wife deceased in the bath, covered in blood and partially submerged. He initially told emergency responders that his wife had slipped and fallen in the bath. However, the truth of what actually happened is sickening. The pair had been having arguments due to his finances. David had lied to Shanti about his supposed fortune and wanted her to appear on a home renovation show to get some house updates. The show was called Zombie House Flipping, and it was a show where contestants renovate properties into impressive homes. When his wife refused to take part, David was furious. The pair began sleeping apart. David was in the garage and Shanti was in a 1-bedroom studio on the property. After David was ultimately exposed by Shanti for lying about his multi-million-dollar fortune, David saw a way out. He brutally strangled and beat his wife to death in the studio of their home. He tried to stage the scene to make it look like an accidental death. He told police that he had dragged her from the bathtub and carried her to the living room. Emergency responders, however, noted that the pair were both suspiciously dry when they arrived. A medical examiner concluded that her cause of death was blunt force trauma and strangulation. David was arrested and charged with her murder 4 months later. Tragically, Shanti had an 8-year-old son from a prior relationship who is now left without a mother. David was sentenced to life in prison. A neighbour spotted a 1-year-old wandering the streets of Michigan alone. Alarm bells rang. However, they never expected the disturbing events that followed. It was December the 12th, 2016. A 1-year-old boy was spotted wandering around the corner of Plymouth Road and Warwick Street. Concerned neighbours rang the police and an alert was put out on local news. The child's granddad spotted the bulletin and rang police. He confirmed the child's identity, and this set off a string of concerning events. 33-year-old Nicole Smith was the child's mum, and it became apparent she was nowhere to be found. She was soon reported missing. She was last seen the day prior on the corner of Long Acre and Chicago Street in Detroit. That day she was due to meet a family member at 5 p.m. but never turned up. The family member went to her house and she wasn't there. However, he did see footprints by the drive leading to where the car would have been, and he presumed she just popped out. Now, Nicole had 4 children and they were living in transitional housing prior to her disappearance. Worryingly, she told her friends the day before that she was due to meet a man that she'd met on Facebook. It was unclear whether this mystery man had anything to do with her vanishing, but her family just knew that it was very unusual for her to disappear without her kids. It would eventually be years before any light was shone on this case. Nicole's ex-boyfriend, Robert Autry, was found to be using Nicole's bridge card. Now, this is apparently a card that you can use to purchase food from certain shops. He was arrested and charged with Nicole's murder. However, frustratingly, police did not have enough evidence to convict him. Later though, Robert was actually charged on suspicion of SA. He actually confessed to killing Nicole at this point. He even told police where they could find her remains. He led police to an abandoned apartment in Detroit's west side. As expected, Nicole's body was found there. He pleaded guilty to her murder and will likely be behind bars for life.
Part 2 of the Lola James case. Trigger warning, her injuries are listed and they're quite hard to listen to. Just after Kyle Bevan's mother called 999, they also received a call from Sinead.
She's fallen down the stairs, she has. Right, okay. From the top of the stairs to the bottom, and her whole head's all swollen, and she bit the top of her tongue off or something. Okay. So, just to confirm, is she conscious? Is she conscious? I don't even know. Yeah, she's conscious. She's breathing and everything. She's just sleeping. Can you go and sit with her, please? So does she wake up when you try and wake her? She like moves when I try to wake up, her eyes are all swollen and all. What caused the fall? This bloody dog that I had at barged her and she just fell. Okay. Is there any serious bleeding? Kyle, is there any serious bleeding? Is there any serious bleeding? No. Okay. It's just bruising and her head's all swollen and her eyes. Okay, so stay on the line and tell her exactly what to do next. Do not move her unless she's in danger and do not splint any injuries. Can I take her name? Yeah, it's Lola James. Paramedics arrived at the house after just 5 minutes and Lola was taken to Withybush Hospital, where Kyle became really aggressive and defensive when doctors were asking questions about Lola's injuries. Lola was then transferred to University Hospital Wales in Cardiff, and while she was laying in a hospital bed fighting for her life, Kyle messaged Sinead asking what she was going to tell the police. Sinead and Kyle were both arrested, and on July 21st, 2020, at 1:18 p.m, Lola James passed away due to her catastrophic brain injury. One doctor who examined Lola said she was the most battered and bruised child she'd ever seen during her long career. These are just some of the injuries. Multiple bruises on her forehead, scalp and around her eyes, 2 cuts near her right eye, hemorrhages to the upper part of her neck and back of her skull, 3 puncture wounds on her forehead, swollen lips, bruising along her cheekbone, hemorrhages on left cheek and temple, bruising on her nose, dark red bruising on her jawline, scratches all over her cheek, chin and neck, bruising on her neck and ears, bruised shoulders, abrasions on her back possibly caused by a weapon, extensive bruising on her back, extensive bruising to her thighs, groin and pelvis, bruising to her knees and lower legs, bruising on her chest, bruising on her arms and hands. There wasn't one part of Lola's tiny body that wasn't bruised, and she sustained 101 injuries in total. Lola had been hit so hard by Kyle that it caused subdural bleeding in her skull, and she'd then been shaken so violently that she lost consciousness and died as a result of brain damage. Sinead and Kyle were both sentenced yesterday on 25th of April 2023, so please go to part 3 for details of the sentencing. This is 2-year-old Lola James. Lola never made it to her 3rd birthday. Her life was cut short by a monster that her mother allowed into their home just days after meeting him online. Kyle Bevan was a self-confessed spicehead. He regularly used amphetamines, Xanax, Valium and cannabis. Sinead James, a mother of 3, already had social services involved as she was a previous victim of domestic abuse. She'd had a social services visit in February 2020 and they did raise concerns about the filthy conditions of the house. As you can see, these aren't living conditions for 3 children, and social services did raise concerns but never did a follow-up visit. Sinead had been warned by the local authority not to invite any adults into the house if she didn't know them well or if they were involved with drug or alcohol abuse. Yet Kyle moved in February 2020, despite having only met him just days before.
Kyle has a daughter, and Sinead had actually been warned over Facebook Messenger by his child's grandmother that he was a child protection risk and shouldn't be around her children. Yet she still allowed him into the house and left him alone with Lola on multiple occasions. On the 9th of July 2020, while she was in Kyle's care, Lola sustained an injury to the bridge of her nose. It also caused her eyes to swell up, and Kyle's story was that she'd fallen off the sofa because she was knocked by the dog and she'd fallen onto the coffee table. Sinead bought this story and no more questions were asked. Just a week later, Lola was murdered. On July 16th, 2020, Sinead went to bed and left Lola and Kyle downstairs by themselves. Just after midnight, she woke up to a loud bang and a scream from Lola. She went into Lola's bedroom and found Kyle with Lola on his knee. He said that she'd banged her head and that he was dealing with it, and after being told, "I've got this," she went back to bed. At 4:26 a.m, Kyle is said to have taken a picture of some injuries on Lola's back, and then just 2 hours later, he sent a disturbing video to his mother showing him trying to prop Lola up. She was severely injured at this point, and he was holding her up and then letting her drop to the floor. He said, "No, she's gone." At 7:20 a.m, Sinead was woken up by Kyle, who said that Lola had fallen down the stairs. He held out his finger, and it had the tip of Lola's tongue on the end that she'd bitten off. 8 minutes later, Kyle phones his mother and asks her to phone an ambulance.
A 2-year-old, she's got ADHD. She's fallen from top to bottom of the stairs. They can't wake her up, and then she's bit the end of her tongue because they're not sure if she's fitted. But she's floppy, they can't wake her up.
Please go to part 2. There'll be a trigger warning at the beginning because Lola's injuries are quite hard to listen to.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
Some are calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case. You will not believe this insane plot twist. In 2008, Carolyn Watson and Julian Butchwold were a young religious couple. They were living in Melbourne, Australia, and had been together around 2 years. Julian was driving the pair to a picnic date in the car, but he actually stopped the car suddenly, noticing an animal on the side of the road. Suddenly, something horrific happened. Carolyn's vision went completely black after being blindfolded by a terrifying masked man. All she could work out was she was being stripped off and thrown into a vehicle. The car finally stopped and she took her blindfold off, and she was really relieved to see that her boyfriend was by her side. He'd also been stripped off and the couple were completely in the middle of nowhere. The pair managed to untie themselves, but were having to just wander around aimlessly for a week, trying to find safety. Meanwhile, police were desperately searching for the couple. Family and friends were really concerned, and they knew how out of character this was for the pair to go missing. They sent out air and water search teams, but just couldn't locate the couple. As the missing pair were very religious, they'd actually vowed to be celibate until marriage, but Julian started to suggest that it might be a good idea to break this celibacy in order to keep them warm. Finally, a local farmer found the couple and alerted police. However, they quickly found that the story didn't really add up. Julian soon confessed to police that he'd actually made the whole thing up and he'd staged the kidnapping. His motive was purely to try and get his girlfriend to break their vow of celibacy. This is the UK's most famous missing boy. In September 2007, Andrew Gosden was just 14 years old. He was a very intelligent boy and was top of his class in most classes at school. He was an introvert that usually spent most of his time at home. The day before Andrew went missing seemed completely normal. He went to school, he had some tea, and then he watched some TV. However, on September the 14th, he seemed more irritable than normal. Instead of getting the bus to school that morning like his parents thought he was, he went to a cash point and withdrew £200. CCTV then captures him walking home, where he changed his clothes into a Slipknot t-shirt. When he left the house, he didn't take his charger with him, and he also didn't take £100 that he'd saved up. He didn't take his passport, but he did take his house key, which indicates he was going to come home. He bought a one-way ticket to London and was last seen leaving King's Cross station at about 11:30. Frustratingly, the school had actually tried to contact Andrew's parents to say that he hadn't turned up to school that day, but they dialed the wrong number and left an answer phone message on the wrong phone. His family was completely cleared of any suspicion, and the family and the school and all of the students went to London and they were handing out loads of flyers. Weirdly, a year after this incident, a man came to a police station to say that he had information about Andrew. Now, the police station was unmanned, so the person spoke to this man just over an intercom system and sent a police officer down there. Mysteriously, by the time the police officer arrived, the person had vanished. This is what Andrew might look like now, just being the age that he may be if he's still alive. Theories about this case is that he may have gone to London to meet up with someone or go to a concert. Was he lured there by somebody with bad intentions, or was he just going there for the day, gonna come back, and was at the wrong place at the wrong time and somebody did something bad to him? In 2009, the family paid for a search of the River Thames to try and find some sort of closure. The search did find a body, but it wasn't Andrew's. The most up-to-date information that we have on this case is that 2 men were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Andrew, but they've actually been released. Shocking case of the Philpotts. On the 11th of May 2012, 6 children were in bed asleep when a huge fire broke out of their home. As smoke roared through the building, Mairead Philpott, the children's mother, called the emergency services. Their dad, Mick Philpott, was reportedly making heroic attempts to try and save them. However, 5 children unfortunately died in the fire, and the eldest actually passed away in hospital later on. At first, this appeared to be a tragic accident, but the truth was soon revealed. The fire had been started intentionally with petrol underneath the letterbox. When word got out about who the children's father was, many people were already familiar with him. Mick Philpott was notorious for being outspoken and provocative and had appeared on The Jeremy Kyle Show. He claimed to have had 2 wives and seemed to be really proud of this. He also had a horrible history of abusive behaviour towards women. He had been convicted for attacking 2 women with a knife and headbutting a female colleague. A press conference was held about the tragedy that had unfolded. Reporters really expected at this point for the Philpotts to come out and appeal to anyone who had any information about the fire. What the Philpotts actually did was just kind of came out and started thanking people. They didn't ask for any help with any information about the case at all. The only thing Mick asked for is to be left alone. If this genuinely had nothing to do with the parents, you would think that they would come out and be desperate for more information. Neighbours from across the road actually went to the police and told them that they had seen Mick during the fire. He was outside pretending to cough, not actually going in trying to help rescue his children. Police were now suspicious enough to try and set a trap for the Philpotts. They kept them in a hotel room and actually bugged the room. The recording reveals Mick quizzing his wife about how convincing she'd been in her police interview. Locals had also spotted the couple in a pub doing karaoke, dancing and drinking shots. Incredibly strange behaviour for 2 people who'd just lost their children. It also came out that Mick was reportedly flirting with nurses at the hospital where his son was on a life support machine. The true story of what actually happened was all about Mick Philpott getting revenge on his ex. In early 2012, one of his wives had left him. She walked out with 5 of their children, and Mick just could not take this rejection. He wanted to do something to get her back and wanted custody of his 5 children with her. He set the fire up to frame the ex to make it look like she'd done it. He wanted to be the heroic dad to save all his children and for his ex to go to prison for it. Mick got life in prison for this. Mariad got 17 years and is now released.